Welcome to Matinee Free Webinar. Today we have two eminent speakers from USA, both working for EQ4 Peace all over the world, and Mr. Ray and Mr. Matthis, and both expert in emotional intelligence. And today we are discussing a special topic on combating hate with mental and emotional karate. So on behalf of you all, I'm welcoming both Ray and Matt. So both on this Sajal Festival Day, Vishu Day, I'm inviting you both. Thank you.
Hope it'll be a day of peace.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, wonderful. Yes,
The other
congratulations and welcome everybody.
The other 364
Very nice
days.
to be here. Yeah. Very nice to be here on your special day. We were just seeing pictures of the Onan Festival, and it looks wonderful, colorful, happy, joyous, lovely. It's perfect for emotional intelligence. Good start. So this is a good day, and we're talking about not hating, right? Combating hate. We're trying to not hate, and so that's another emotional intelligence skill. We're using mental and emotional karate, which is a concept that Ray came up with. He has some really good information for you today. So I'm going to do just a few slides and I'll go through it fairly quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Ray so we can get into it, because there's some good stuff. You'll want to take some notes today, and I'll be taking notes again as usual. Learn like crazy from him. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Again, we're talking about trying not to hate. We can be angry, we can be upset, we can be disappointed, but try not to hate. That gets over the line where you start where you judge the person as a bad person, and you are hateful toward them, and it's not helpful at all, in you or in them. So that's a good big part of positive mental health, is managing our emotions and our reactions. So I'm going to talk a bit about nonviolent communications. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of that before. It's extremely popular worldwide. It's a way of speaking it so that you don't hate, and that you don't get into fights as much, and you can it's helpful when sides disagree. It's extremely popular. It's tricky. It's kind of a new language in a way. Some people actually consider it like almost like a learning a second language, but because you use different words a lot of times, but you'll understand the concepts, and it goes nicely, very nicely with emotional intelligence, very nicely. So nonviolent communication, it's about maximizing our liberty, meaning we accept each other, enhances our understanding of the relationship between feelings and needs. And Ray's going to talk more about that, because there's a difference between what we want and what we need, and that changes everything if we can adjust that and get it right. That most of the time, except for food, air, and water, it's what we want, not what we need, even though we think we need it. We talk about needing it and we feel like we need it, we don't. So, right. We're trying to promote equality and create compassion. Big deal about compassion and understanding of each other. So there's two parts. There's expressing, right? There's talking, and there's listening, right? Not rocket science here. We express honestly of these four components, which I'll talk about. And then we receive empathically, meaning you hear it from the other person's point of view, try to be understanding and accepting of them, of what's going on inside of them. Our thoughts and feelings are important to us, and surprise, surprise, they're important to other people as well. If you want to get along well with other people, you want to come to agreement peacefully, then you got to understand what's going on for them. It's not just about you, right? So we have to receive empathically. The steps are to observe and identify the situation without evaluating. Means you pay attention to what's going on. In our world, we call it awareness first, awareness and acceptance. Awareness and acceptance. We are aware of what's happening, and we're accepting what's happening, that it's real, that it's happening, it's real, it's happening. And try not to judge it. Try to keep your thoughts out of it. Just be aware of what's going on. Then you in them and in this situation and what we're talking about, then you identify my feelings, what's going on for me. That's really important. Again, awareness and acceptance. Then we figure out, what is it that I want? What is it I want? What do I need, want, or desire? Probably not need, but want or desire, figuring out what that is, and then make that into a request. Make that into a request. And I'll talk more about each of those steps. So first, we try to observe what is happening without judgment. We're trying to release it from evaluation and our opinion and our judgments and our thoughts. We try to move it away from that stuff and just figure out the facts of what's going on. Next, we try to figure out, okay, from those facts of what's going on, now what do I feel? Not what you were doing, not what you're feeling, not what guessing a lot of stuff about what's going on for them yet. We identify inside of ourselves what we are feeling, right? This is emotional intelligence. What are we feeling? Are we hurt or amused or irritated, annoyed? Is it good feelings, not so good feelings? Doesn't really matter, but we need to be aware of them and accept them as well. Then we figure out, what do we want from this situation? What would we like? What would we like in 6 seconds? In 6 seconds, they do know, choose, give. And it's about what do you want? You understanding what's going on inside of you and figuring out what it is you want. You choose to receive. Then you make a request, and there's a lot of detail about how to do requests. It's very carefully laid out in language. You express what you want, not what you don't want, right? Like, I wish you didn't spend so much time at work versus I wish you'd spend more time at home. You try to talk about what you want, not what you don't want. You make it consciously so that it's real clear what it is you want. Ask for reflection. Do you understand? What are you hearing? Am I getting my point across? You can ask for reflection and honest feedback. What do you feel about that? What do you think and feel about that? Again, that's respecting another person's thoughts and feelings. Be careful, not making your request into a actual demand that pushes people away and they don't want to play anymore when you're demanding, or if there's tricky in there that you're punishing or blaming in your request. And so you be careful about that. And the idea is to build relationships. It's to be aware of my thoughts and feelings and be aware of their thoughts and feelings and respect the differences. We're trying to build relationships. That's what keeps it from turning into hatred. So there's different levels of listening. This probably should have been a little bit earlier on the first part, but you can ignore that's, you're not listening at all. La la la, I'm not listening to you at all. I could pretend to listen and shake your head every once in a while or or grunt or something, and you're not really listening, but you're pretending to listen. Next step, more open, is being selective, that you listen to some of the words, but not all the words. Then you're attentive, means you're actually listening to the words, but you're not feeling with them so much. You're just listening to the words. You're paying attention, and you have you look like you're listening. And the best step is empathy, empathetic listening, where you actually hear what they're saying and what they're not saying, and what they're some of the emotions that you figure are going on for them. And that's called empathy. Empathy, number one skill in emotional intelligence, is empathy. So another thing to get very, very good at, if you can, is caring what other people are feeling. It's kind of a guess a lot of times, because you don't know for sure what they're feeling. A lot of times people, they don't know what they're feeling either, exactly, because not that many people are emotionally aware. But if we try to be present and hear them and have some compassion, and it's kind of a guess for what's going on for them. There are 4 elements to listening. We're seeing the world from their point of view. We appreciate them as a human being, not just something that I need to blow past. You're actual human, and it matters to you. Understanding my feelings and their feelings, and then coming to some understanding, communicating understanding with each other and creating your requests so that they can be met and you can get along and work it out. So another about empathy, our ability to offer empathy can allow us to stay vulnerable, diffuse potential violence, help us hear the word no without taking it as rejection, revive lifeless conversation, and even hear the feelings and needs expressed through silence, right? You can guess what's happening with people even when they're silent. It's pretty cool. So, and then here's some links. They're all in motion or nonviolentcommunication.com, which is right here. If you want to learn more about it, there's tons and tons of stuff about it. Very interesting, and it can help you with your relationships and your communication skills from here on. So quick overview of NVC. I will now turn it over to Big Ray. Talk to us.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, this will stop over. Okay, yes, okay. There's that.
And I'm going to switch over to my notepad so I can start taking notes right away because he's got some great stuff.
And let's see, slideshow. From the beginning, here we go. Okay, so we're going to talk about positive mental health, specifically combating hate with what I call mental emotional karate. Now, Matt always says you have to deal with the negative in order to get to the positive, which means you have to deal with the hate to get to peace, which is the goal of our organization. Now, the 3 steps of P&H that Matt talks about all the time is awareness, acceptance, and action or no action. Now, there's 3 parts to this presentation. First is why people hate others. The second is combating hate in yourself. And the third is dealing with hate in others. Now, part 1, why people hate others. Emotion, start with the very basics. Emotion is energy to move to help us deal with perceived threats. And the key word there is perceived, and to help us get what we want and need. Now, protecting us from threats, especially those to life and limb, is the primary function of the human brain. That's what it's all about, okay? Hate arises from perceiving others, rightly or wrongly, as a potential threat. Now, there have always been and continue to be potential threats from others, including to life and limb. Others competing for the same finite resources, others competing for the same jobs, some who would take what you have, okay? Some who don't play by the rules, whatever those rules happen to be for your situation, and some who would be violent. So those are all potential threats. Now, cooperation, compromise, and sharing are nice if you can get people to do those things, but some conflict is inevitable, okay? Especially when food, water, and safety is in short supply. Now, the problem, though, throughout human history has always been that people too often perceive threats where they don't or need not exist, or magnify ones that do exist out of proportion to reality. That has caused a lot of needless hate, conflict, suffering, and even death. Now, you don't always need an activating or precipitating event to end up with hate. People don't need a good reason to hate others, okay? Now, here's some current perceived threats in the United States. People perceive LGBTQ individuals as a threat. Transgender individuals are a big perceived threat right now, even though they're no threat to anybody. Critical race theory is one that's big right now. Everybody worries it's going to be taught in schools. It's not being taught in any schools at all. Some people have reported in surveys that they'd be willing to kill a neighbor who's liberal or Democrat to save the country. I mean, that's how crazy these perceived threats have gotten. People of color and immigrants have always been a perceived threat. Religious faith other than Christian, and something they call government overreach. Now, here's some factors that exacerbate threats, and I'm going to go through each one. There are 2 innate cognitive tendencies we all have. The fact that we have what's called a symbolic self, and that most people have what's called an external locus of control. And then there's 4 types of irrational thinking. Demandingness, awfulizing, can't stand that itis, and label and damning. Now, the 2 innate cognitive tendencies I think that cause hate is one is to note and attend to differences between us and others, okay? And the second one is to generalize and sometimes overgeneralize about our experience. Now, most people probably are largely aware of, are relatively unaware of these tendencies, which allow them to operate on autopilot. And what Matt has mentioned before is called being unconsciously incompetent. So they're creating a lot of needless hate without realizing they're doing it because of these two tendencies. Now, both tendencies evolved probably to enhance survival, okay? Because in early human history, when people weren't as mobile as they are today, before people became so mobile, gene pools and cultures became highly refined to maximize survival. So therefore, differences that came along or differences that occurred when people were born and so forth could represent threats, and they still can. You know, in war, for example, if somebody's wearing a different uniform than you, that could represent a potential threat. Now, generalizing was a way to help to recognize potential recurrent and future threats. Now, here's a simple example how it might backfire, though. A woman is assaulted by a man. It's understandable and even protective that she might be wary of future interactions with men. But she could perceive all men as representing the same threat as her attacker did. And even though many might be protectors instead. So overgeneralizing ends up being too much of an otherwise good thing. Now, as mobility has increased, it has resulted with many people with obvious physical and cultural differences coming into more and closer contact. And because of these two innate cognitive tendencies, in many ways, it's become like an accident looking for a place to happen. You've got all these differences coming together, and you've got innate tendencies that tend to note and attend to those differences and sometimes make too much of them. Now, skin color, for example, can be a very obvious physical difference, which is why it's always been a source of needless perceived threats. Now, even the whole concepts of black and white, I believe they're overgeneralizations themselves, because there's no truly black or white individuals. In America, we often hear people refer in the news and everywhere else as a black American or a white American. Well, there are no truly black or white individuals. You know, your skin color is mainly determined by melanin production, and melanin is it's not an either or proposition. Like so many other things about being human, its production is represented by what we call a bell curve, which means there are some who produce a lot of it, others who produce very little, and a whole bunch of people in between. And the ability to produce it stems from how close one's ancestors lived to the equator. So it's kind of nature's sunscreen. Now, the second factor that exacerbates threats is some fact that we have what's called a symbolic self, which is the person we want to be and be seen as by others. Now, verbal attacks against us get perceived as meaning we're not living up to either our own or other people's expectations in some way. And verbal attacks get perceived as a threat to the symbolic self. So basically, the way we hear it is you're not who you think you are or should be. Now, and the brain, unfortunately, treats attacks on the verbal self, perceived attacks on the verbal self, or threats to the symbolic self, the same as one to life and limb, and that magnifies the threat out of proportion to reality. And I'll talk later about how to deal with this. Now, I meant when I was a teacher, health education teacher, part of our job is to talk about sexuality, and I've had more than my share of young men who were homophobic. And I always believe that homophobia probably arose out of someone's insecurities about their own sexuality. And hating gay people was an attempt to defend against their own inclinations to be that way. And it's kind of like the hate was intended to build a wall around themselves to keep it from happening. Now, a third factor that exacerbates threats is called locus of control. It's where you see your feelings is coming from, what you see as the cause of them. Now, most people have an external locus of control, which means they wrongly, and I emphasize wrongly, see others as the cause of how they feel. And you don't like feeling the way you do, so you wrongly blame others for how you feel. That makes them causes you to wrongly perceive them as a threat, and a threat that doesn't exist or doesn't need to exist. And I'll explain why later. Now, I looked up the word demagoguery because there's a lot of that going on everywhere in the world, including the United States. It's political activity or practices that seek support by appealing to the prejudices of ordinary people rather than by using rational judgment. And we got a lot of that going on in the United States right now. And a locus control tends to be connected to that, because if you believe others make you feel bad, if you believe others make your life worse, it makes you more vulnerable to succumbing to demagoguery and hating other people, and that being a basis of your political support for one candidate or another. Now, the flip side of an external locus of control is you also believe someone can make you feel better, and you believe someone can make your life better. Now, so you're more likely to look for and accept what I would call a savior. Okay, that makes you more prone to becoming a religious zealot, extremist, and to following a cult leader, for example, like the infamous James Jones. And you're more susceptible to the promises of demagogues. And here's an example in our US politics. We have devoutly religious, what we call evangelical Christians, overwhelmingly support former President Donald J. Trump in elections, despite the fact that he behaves in very un-Christian-like ways. Now, but when you think about it, I was raised an evangelical Christian, and one of the tenets of evangelical Christianity is where Jesus would say, "I am the truth, the way, and the life." Well, now we have Donald Trump saying things like, "I alone can fix it. No one knows better than me. Don't believe what you hear and see, believe what I tell you." So he's tapping into all that external locus control that evangelical Christians have, where they look to a savior to make their life better, make them feel better. Now, let's talk about the 4 types of irrational thinking and how they exacerbate threats. They're called demandingness, awfulizing, can't stand the itis, and label and damning. Now, you can look at things in 3 basic ways. You could not care about it, and you could really not care about it. You could sort of not care about it. You could want, prefer, and desire it. And you could sort of want it, prefer, and desire it, or you could really. And then you could just sort of think you need it, it's a necessity, and demand it, or you could really do that. Now, you can perceive others as standing in your way of getting what you want and need. That will happen oftentimes. Others may very well end up representing competition for what you want and need, with jobs, food, even other people, relationships. Now, that causes you to perceive them as a threat, and that part of it is understandable. But what happens is we all have these 3 basic cognitive tendencies, or what I would call missteps, where we start to think we need something you simply want. You start to treat a simple preference as a necessity in your life, and you start to demand what you simply desire. And the reason that's all important is because the greater the difference between your expectations and reality, the greater the perceived threat will be when you don't get what you want, lose it, or imagine doing either. Now, these cognitive tendencies or missteps can magnify the perceived threat that others represent out of proportion to reality. Now, people can even equate their wants, preferences, and desires to air, water, and food in their own minds, which makes not getting what they want, prefer, or desire equivalent to suffocating, dying of thirst or hunger, which is like the ultimate threat to human beings. Now, we all have the right to want whatever we want. That's a basic rule as far as I'm concerned, including for others and life to be the way we want them to be. The problem is that people too often start to demand that others in life be the way they want. And that's going on a lot in the United States, which is causing a lot of needless hate, okay? Basically, we have too many people in the United States saying everything has to be the way I want it to be. And they're being encouraged to be demanding like that. And everyone has to look or think or believe and behave the way I do, the way I want them to. So that's causing a lot of needless hate because it's exacerbating the threat people perceive in others who are different than them. Now, so that makes others who look, think, or believe and behave differently a much bigger perceived threat than they are or need to be. Now, the thing about anger and hate is very often is preceded by anxiety. Anger and hate is often a secondary emotion. Now, the formula for anxiety is you imagine something happening, and then you tell yourself it'll be awful if that does, and that's what causes the anxiety. If you said, so what, who cares, you wouldn't have anxiety. Now, so there are a lot of things in life that are unpleasant, inconvenient, or uncomfortable. And that would represent, if you look at things that way, would represent a certain amount of threat. But when people tell themselves it's awful, like the worst possible thing that could be happening, we call that awfulizing. And that magnifies the perceived threat out of proportion to reality. And you're more likely then to generate anxiety, which may morph into anger and hate and be focused on one particular person or group. Now, an example in American politics right now, state legislatures all across the country are passing laws that make it illegal to have drag shows or attend drag shows, as if those are some big threat. They've been around since the beginning of time, and yet now people are going crazy with these things, perceiving them as some major threat. Now, we all have the right to dislike whatever we want to. That's another human right I believe we all have. Now, the problem is people will go from not liking it, which could create a certain perceived threat, to telling themselves, I can't stand that, which magnifies the threat out of proportion to reality. And then they also have the right to dislike the way others look, think, feel, or behave, which would represent a certain perceived threat. But then they label and damn the person, and that magnifies the threat out of proportion to reality. Now, label and damning is basically one of those innate cognitive tendencies, is to overgeneralize. And I always liken it to calling an apple bad simply because it has a bruise, even though most of the apple is perfectly fine. And it's condemning the doer instead of simply their deed. Now, racism, xenophobia, and bigotry, they're all a product of overgeneralization. And basically, sometimes people in the United States question about how we should talk about racism in schools. Well, as a teacher, I would suggest deal with it as overgeneralization. Okay, extreme political division in the United States is also a factor of label and damning. For example, sometimes when I'm online, I'll make a comment and somebody will immediately comment back, well, you're a bleeding heart liberal. So what they're basically doing is taking one thing I say and assuming that I'm all these other things, and basically that everything else I believe or might believe, even though I might share it with them, is wrong too. Now, this is basically the irrational part of overgeneralization that gives rise to racism. First, someone would say that bunch has some bad apples, therefore the whole bunch is bad. Well, every bunch has some bad apples. Doesn't matter who you are or what you are. And then the second generalization is that person is part of that bunch, therefore he or she must be a bad apple too. So that's a second generalization. That's basically the essence of racism, xenophobia, and bigotry. Now, Dr. Albert Ellis used to believe that all these cognitive tendencies or missteps were innate as well and part of being human. So now part two, we're going to talk about combating hate in yourself. Now, again, there's 3 steps to PMH: awareness, acceptance, and then either action or no action. And the next couple of things I'm going to say are basically a mixture of these. First of all, we have all these cognitive tendencies, and they can cause a lot of harm and needless hate. And because we're unaware of them, it's kind of like being way below, like an iceberg. It's way below the surface. And we have all these things going on in our head that we're not completely aware of. And Matt would call that consciously and unconsciously incompetent. You don't know why you're hateful, okay? Now, so Dr. Ellis, one of his famous quotes was, therapy should be educational, and education can be very therapeutic. And I especially believe in the last one. So what we want to try to do is raise these people's awareness of these cognitive tendencies. I think we should be talking more to young people, for example, that you have this natural innate tendency to note and attend to differences. And here's how it can play out. And you have this natural and innate tendency to overgeneralize about things, to call a person a bad apple just because they have a little bruise that you don't like. And we need to make people more aware of those tendencies. Now, as far as what to do about that tendency to note and attend to differences, I think the answer might lie in the concept of Venn diagrams, which we all learn in school, where you have 2 sets of things, and then there's some overlap, and those are the things the two sets have in common, and there's some parts of it that don't overlap, and those are the differences. Well, what happens, this is the way it actually looks like. Human beings, all human beings have a lot more in common than they do ways they differ. But what happens is by focusing on the differences, it magnifies the importance of those differences. And this is what it might look like. It makes it think that we're really different than those other people. And it creates this idea of the other, somebody else that's different than us and that's a threat to us. But it's also something people do in their own heads because of that innate cognitive tendency. Now, there are even some who encourage others, like politicians, for example, or people who lead groups like white nationalists and hate groups, Nazis and things, who encourage others to note and focus on what makes them different from their fellow human beings. And you want to be on the lookout for such people, be wary of what they say. And you don't want to follow them down what we call a rabbit hole. What it means is you go down into the ground, it gets deeper and deeper, and it gets darker and darker. Okay, see, that's what a rabbit hole is. And if you follow their way of thinking and keep focusing on what makes you different, it can get to a really ugly, dark place. Now, starting at the DNA level, we all have a lot more in common than ways we differ. The DNA between us is probably 98, maybe 99% the same. And there's only a few number of genes that make us different in some way. So there's a lot of overlap, okay? Now, other things we have in common and share, physical characteristics and ability. And we all look more like human beings than we do some other species, okay? We all have many of the same wants, preferences, and desires or goals in life. For example, to have people who come across the southern border of the United States, they just want their family's life to be better, just like all the rest of us who live here do. What we value, what's important to us, like family and loved ones. How we respond to adversity, trauma, and loss, what emotions we experience, and the fact that we're fragile in some ways, fallible in other ways, but also have strength sometimes when we need to. Now, the things that make us different are a relatively small part of who we are. I tried to look up how many genes we have and how many genes cause skin color. Now, there's a lot of disagreement. So somewhere between 50 and 100,000 genes determine who we are. And somewhere between 1 and as high as 378 genes determine skin color, depending on what researcher you talk to. Well, that means somewhere between 0.001 to 0.7% determine skin color. Well, that's a very small part of our genetic genome. So to combat racism, we should talk more about the causes and origins of skin color, discourage using black and white, and encourage people simply to think that person has more or less melanin than I do, okay? Now, we all have a choice what we want to focus on, what meaning we want to attach to what we do focus on, and how much importance we want to attach to similarities and differences. And I think choice is power. So recognizing that you have that choice gives you some power to not hate. Now, and you want to challenge your overgeneralizations. For example, listen to using words like always or never. It's called all or nothing thinking. And challenge them. For example, say, always? That's always? They always do that? Or they never do that? And really? And then listen for suggestions that they're all alike. Like all those people are the same, okay? And challenge those. They're all like that? Every single one, all the time? And challenge your overgeneralizations and challenge them in other people too. We'll talk about that later. Now, your best hope is to create cognitive dissonance. And what I mean by that is look for, recognize, and acknowledge and accept the exceptions to your rules about the way you think life is and other people are. Look for the exceptions. The exceptions will create cognitive dissonance, okay? And that will hopefully be resolved by you becoming more discriminating. Now, the word discriminating often is associated with hate, but becoming more discriminating is ironically a way to fight discrimination and the hate that flows from it. And I looked up the word discriminating to make sure I was on the right track here. It means able to recognize or draw fine distinctions, having or showing refined taste or judgment, and making a distinction. Those are three definitions. So that means as opposed to overgeneralizing about people. What that means to me, my definition being discriminating would be putting and keeping differences in their proper perspective. Now, as far as threats to the symbolic self, there's an old adage that would go a long way to help us deal with this. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That's something I was taught as a kid, and a lot of kids get taught that. I don't know if they still teach them that or not. Now, there's a formula for the way life unfolds to explain all this. You have an event. Every human being will generate thoughts about the events of their life. Some of those will cause some feelings, and then that will affect their behavior. Their thoughts and feelings will often dictate their behavior. So put it into words, this formula. Anything others think, feel, say, or do is just an event. Thoughts cause feelings, not events. Most people think their events cause their feelings, but it's really your thoughts about those. Attitude is always the father of behavior, and your behavior will tend to follow your feelings toward your life events. Now, so if you have others criticizing you, putting you down, or name calling you, that gets perceived as a threat. That's what gives rise to the anger and hate. That's a threat to your symbolic self. And then it could lead to verbal or physical aggression. Now, when people criticize you or put you down or name call you, the meaning you can attach to that is that you're not living up to expectations. And that can cause shame. That's the origin of shame. And that shame could also lead to anxiety. And you can get what I call turtles or rabbits. Someone who wants to suck into their shell because they have so much shame, or someone who wants to be a rabbit and run away from somebody or something. Now, but you can also get what I call rattlers, rattlesnakes, who coil, rattle, and strike out with venom because they feel threatened, just like real rattlesnakes do. They strike out with venom, not because they're being nasty, they do it because they feel threatened. Okay. Now, the whole point of this, though, thoughts cause feelings, not events, and attitudes always the father of behavior. We all have a whole host of cognitive choices that really determine how we end up feeling and behaving. It's your choice, for example, how you look at what they think, feel, say. It's your choice what meaning you attach to what they do. It's your choice how much importance you attach to what others think, feel, say, or do. And it's also your choice what you want to expect of yourself, how you look at yourself and what you do or don't do, what meaning you attach to the way you are, what you do or don't do, and how much importance you attach to the way you are or what you do or don't do. Now, basically, it means that no one upsets you, you upset yourself. No one can make you think, feel, say, or do anything. Okay? If you do, that's understandable. It's part Viktor Frankl also had a famous quote, said, everything can be taken from us, but the last of human freedoms. To choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And a short version of that is your last freedom is your attitude, or how you choose to think about things, what's happening to you. And this is where I get the idea of mental and emotional karate. Means defending yourself mentally, emotionally from the verbal attacks of others, like some learn to defend themselves against physical attacks, physical attacks in real karate classes. Now, there are some facts of life. I think it's important to help manage your hate. Others can expect as little or as much as they want to from you. That's their right. They can look at what you do or don't do any way they want. They can attach whatever meaning they want to what you think, feel, say, or do. That's also their right. Now, but it's your choice what you expect of yourself, how you look at what you do or don't do, what meaning you attach to the way you are or what you do or don't do, how much importance you attach to those things. Those are all your rights. So since thoughts cause feelings, it's your choice how you want to feel about yourself. And put this in a big perspective here. What they say about you and the things that criticism or put down as a name, that's their choice. But your self-image or how you look at yourself, that's your choice. How you feel about yourself or your self-esteem, that's your choice. Now, by exercising your power of choice, you're less likely to perceive derogatory things that others think or say as a threat, and less likely to hate them for it. For example, I always think it's like walking down a dark street where there might be some threats, okay, hiding in the shadows. Well, but if you walk down that street with a black belt in karate, you don't feel as threatened. So if you have mental and emotional karate, others' threats aren't as big a deal and you don't have to hate them for it. Now, this is what I call black belt in mental and emotional karate, where your attitude or response, automatic response to someone's attacks would be this: you can think, feel, say whatever you want to about me. That's your choice. But it's my choice how I look at myself and feel about myself. And you don't get to make those choices for me unless I let you, and I choose not to. So that's a black belt in mental and emotional karate. Now, I also would urge anyone who hates to have unconditional self-acceptance, to choose whatever you think, feel, say, or do, have in the past or might in the future, as part of being human and understandable given what your life experiences have been, which may have been much different than others. Because that's a way to deal with the shame, which could morph into anxiety and morph into hate or anger, and where you feel so threatened by what other people say and do. And that's to combat the shame that can morph into anger and hate. Now, basically what I mean by part of being human is it means you'll never be the first or last person in human history to think, feel, say, or do what you do, or look the way you do, make a particular mistake, or to not live up to others or your own expectations. You'll always have a lot of company. Now, and if you put others through everything you've been through and force them to deal with what you are now, they'd probably end up thinking, feeling the same, doing much the same. Some might fare better, some might fare worse, but most would probably be the same. Now, and also there's a thing called unconditional other acceptance, which I would encourage everybody to have. It means choosing to see what others think, feel, say, and do as also part of being human and understandable, given what they have been through, which may have been much different than what you have. Now, you can still dislike or disagree with what they think, feel, say, or do, have in the past or might in the future, but it helps temper your emotional response to what you don't like or what you don't agree with, okay? Now, as far as combating demandingness, you have a right to want whatever you want, but so do others. You have a right to think, feel, say, and do whatever you want to, but so do others. Now, so disputing your demandingness or challenging it, why does everything have to be the way you want it to be? Why do others have to look, think, feel, say, or do and be the way you want them to be? Why does that have to be true? Now, facts of life, it doesn't have to be the way you want it to be, and sometimes won't be. Others don't have to look, think, feel, say, or do or be the way you want them to, and sometimes they won't. Others can think, feel, say, or do or look any way they want to. Now, it's kind of, that whole idea is summed up in that adage of live and let live, okay? And it also has to do with the golden rule, where you say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How would you like it if someone tried to force you to be or think, feel, say, or do the way they do? No one would like that. I wouldn't like it, okay? Others have the right to think, feel, say, and do whatever they want to, and be the way they want to, and look the way they want to. I don't agree with a lot of the way some people dress, but that's their choice, okay? Now, as far as combating awfulizing, is it awful or is it just unpleasant, inconvenient, or uncomfortable to some degree? Is what others think, feel, say, or do awful or just unpleasant, inconvenient, or uncomfortable in some way to you? Is it a big deal or a little deal that people have drag shows, for example, okay? Now, what I used to do this with my students, male students who were homophobic. I would ask them, what real consequence would there be for your own life if that did happen? If two men, for example, chose to love each other, marry, and have sex, what real consequence would there be for your life if others think, feel, say, or do something differently than you? Other than you would probably upset yourself about that, but what real consequence? If somebody does that in another state in the United States, how's that going to affect your life directly? And the answer is it doesn't. Now, reducing needless anxiety, which may morph into hate, you could use the technique called saying in a nod. Well, yeah, that might happen. Some of those things you fear might happen, but they haven't happened yet. And if they do, I'll deal with it. like others do, just like I have other things in the past. Now, combating can't standarditis, which can inflame threats, magnify threats. You have the right to dislike whatever you want to, but why can't you stand it? You can't stand it or just don't like it. And combating label and damning, you have a right to dislike whatever you want to. If you don't like the way people think, feel, say, that's fine. You have that right. But why are they, whatever you call them or refer to them as, just because they think, feel, say, and do things you don't like or disagree with? They're that, or just think, feel, say, and do things you don't like or disagree with. Now, a Chinese proverb, this part, I'll end this section with a Chinese proverb I've always liked. A man who hates and seeks vengeance should dig 2 graves, one for himself and one for the enemy he seeks to destroy. Okay. Now, part 3 is dealing with hate in others. Now, there's some rules I think that are helpful to follow. 1, there are 2 ways to make something you don't like worse. Do nothing and overreact to it. Secondly, if you can't make it better, at least don't make it worse. If you've ever been in the field of medicine, that's called the first do no harm rule. And another one I always like, it takes 1 fool to hatefully rant and 2 to make a conversation out of it. In other words, they can do it, but you don't have to join in. And we always need at least 1 adult in the room. That's a very important rule. And sometimes the best thing to say and do is nothing. Now, the key point, though, is it's important to keep your emotional thermostat in the right place to deal with the hate in others. You can be frustrated, irritated, and annoyed, but you're still free to respond to them in the best possible way. But if you go up to anger, you're going to react and overreact, and it's just going to get worse. Now, you have a right. So keep in mind that you have a right to like or want whatever you want. You have a right to like or dislike whatever you want to. No, but no one upsets you, you upset yourself. So if you turn your thermostat up to where you start demanding that everybody be the way you are and think, feel, say, and act the way you do, then you're more likely to awfulize, tell yourself you can't stand it, and label and damn that person, and to get angry and aggressive, either verbally or even physically. And that's why a lot of times in these protests and counter protests, people end up fighting physically. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of is that when people really get disturbed and make themselves angry and hate others, it's because they start to think and say, how dare you? And our vice president does this sometimes publicly. She'll say, how dare you do that? Whatever, maybe get rid of abortion or whatever it happens to be. How could you believe that or feel that way or say something like that, act like that or be that way? Well, the answer to those questions is easily. It doesn't take a lot of effort or energy for people to think, feel, say, and do things differently than you would like. Now, so the trick is to try to keep your emotional thermostat or your think thermostat at want, prefer, and desire, and that will allow you to deal with others better. Now, one of the ways to do that is to put your verbal behavior where you want your attitude to be. Practice talking the way you want to think. Use words or phrases like, I wish they did this, or I wish they didn't look at things that way. I want them to, or I don't want them to. I'd rather they, or I'd rather they not. I'd prefer they, or I'd prefer they not. Or I don't like it when they, I like it better when they, as opposed to saying things like they need to, or they have to, or they should, or they can't, or shouldn't. Now, and recognize in dealing with others who hate, you can't control what others think, feel, say, or do. You can't make them change. Others can think, feel, say, or do whatever they want to. They don't have to think, feel, say, or do what you do or what you want them to. The best you can do is hope to maybe perhaps influence what they think, feel, say, and do. Recognize also that trying to shame them into changing the way they think, feel, say, or do typically will backfire. It often has the opposite effect. Okay, they often perceive those things as threats. And then people, if people feel attacked, they will often simply double down on what they think, feel, say, or do in self-defense. They'll often become defensive and strike out with venom. So you don't want to go that route. Now, it helps to have unconditional other acceptance, I mentioned earlier, to choose to see what they think, feel, say, or do as part of being human and being understandable, given what they've been through, which may have been much different than what you have. Now, one of the ways I encourage people to think about this is suppose everybody came with movies of their lives. If you watch someone else's movie, would you probably see the understandable reasons that they think, feel, say, and do what they do? My answer to that would be probably yes. Okay, you probably would. You can still like or disagree with what they think, feel, say, or do. It just helps temper your emotional response to choose to look at it this way. Now, your basic options when you don't like what you're hearing or seeing, there's 4 basic options. You can problem solve and assert yourself. You could tolerate with disturbance, put up with what you're seeing and hearing and get all upset about it. You could tolerate without disturbance. I don't like it, but I'm not going to upset myself about it. Or you could leave a situation, leave a job, leave a relationship, leave a country. Now, as far as problem solving, what, if anything, can you do? Well, it's important to remember what you do and don't control. And it's also important to remember what will or won't work. And I mentioned those things earlier. You also important to remember that their anger or hate gives them a false sense of power, righteousness, permission, and protection. And that makes it hard for them to deal with. A question my mentor used to always ask is, you ever met an angry person who thought they were wrong? And the answer is no. So trying to reason with someone who's actively hating or angry it just won't work. Now, your best hope, just the same best hope that with yourself, is to create cognitive dissonance wherever and whenever possible, to tactfully point out the exceptions to their rules, to hope they resolve that by modifying their beliefs in some helpful ways. And this can happen naturally. For example, in combat, let's say a white American is fighting with a black American saves the white American's life, and this person was originally racist. Well, that really creates a lot of cognitive dissonance for that white American to continue his racist way of looking at things. Now, one of the ways I do in America is I refer to some of our founding ideals. For example, people who hate others, I would say, look, our basic founding ideal was we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So how does that match up with what you're thinking, feeling, saying, and doing? Now, you can also use a technique called active listening, where you reflect back to them what they're saying. For example, you'd say, so you're saying, or you're suggesting, or so you believe that, or your opinion is that. And then sometimes just hearing what they've said out loud will cause people to reflect more on what they're actually saying and thinking. Now, you need to remember and respect that they have a right to look at things any way they want to, same as you do. They have a right to want whatever they want, same as you do. They have a right to dislike or like whatever they want to, same as you do. They have a right to disturb themselves as much as they want to, just like you do. Now, tactfully challenge the other's rational thinking whenever you get the chance. For example, why, very tactfully say, why do they have to be the way you want or do that? Why can't others think, feel, say, or do something different? Why is it so awful that others go to a drag show? You can't stand it or just don't like it? Why are they, whatever you call them, just because they do this one thing? Now, you can also do a thing called affirm their preference, which means before you challenge them, you say, look, you have every right to want whatever it is you want, but why do others have to look at things the same way you do? You have every right to dislike something, but why can't they do that? I can understand why you don't like that, but I agree that we'd be better if people did something, but why do they have to do what you want? Now, if you're going to assert yourself with people who are hateful, your best hope is to use what we call I messages, which means you start whatever you say with I and force yourself to do that. And you simply give others information. For example, what you don't like, what you don't want. It also helps to share what you like and want instead. And you leave it up to them what they're going to do about that information. And if you point your finger anywhere, you point your finger at yourself. When you point it at other people, that's very threatening. Now, you don't want any conversation or discussion to become about power and control or about who's right and wrong. And that's what it can easily degrade into. So there's a technique called taking the wind out of their sails. So when they get all puffed up and angry because they think you're trying to change the way they think and feel, you can say, look, you're right. You have every right to look at things any way you want to. It's your choice how you want to look at things. I'm not about to try to convince you otherwise. I understand why you look at things that way. It's totally up to you how you want to look at things. And then you can push. That's a way of saying, okay, fine. But you can push a little bit tactfully. Now, tolerating without disturbance, there's a few cautions with that. One is you get what you tolerate. And if you tolerate it, what reason does the person have to change the way they think, feel, or behave? Now, always want to remember about what I call ruts too. When you're dealing with somebody who's hateful, you got to remember whatever they think and feel, say or do is deeply rooted in their brain from years of practice and rehearsal. It makes it very automatic. So they'll probably surround themselves with others who think, feel, say, and do the same things. There's an old saying, birds of a feather flock together. And once they create these ruts, they can't get rid of them. They can only make new ones by practicing and rehearsing new ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And that'll take time and practice, assuming they even choose to change. But even then, they probably can and will slip back into some of their old ruts and resort to some of their own hateful ways of thinking, feeling, and saying and doing things. Now, there's also something I call functional disputes, which are a different kind of challenge. Well, you might ask somebody, what do you really want? How do you want to feel? Do you want to hate everybody like this all the time? What do you want your life to be like? Do you want to get along with people or fight with everybody? Or you can even say, what kind of country do you want? What kind of country do we want in the United States? And then the next question is, how's it working for you and others to think, feel, say, and do what you or they are? And what if you keep thinking, feeling, saying, and doing what you are or they are? How's that going to work out? Are we going to get what we really want as a country? Or are you going to get what you want personally as the kind of life you want to live? Now, and the other question I use sometimes is, suppose the people who are being very demanding that everything be the way they want, I say, suppose you did get everything you wanted and everything was the way you wanted. What do you think the people who disagree with you, what do you think they're going to do? Just settle for that and say, oh, okay, fine, we'll do it the way you want. Or is it just going to be more conflict? You're going to have to compromise. Now, so just to summarize, 3 parts we talked about: why people hate others, combating hate in yourself, and dealing with hate in others. Now, we mentioned the 3 steps of P&H, and what everything I said was a combination of awareness, acceptance, and action or no action. Sometimes the best thing to do is nothing. Now, be aware and accept that the real problem throughout human history has always been that people too often perceive threats where they didn't or need not have existed, or magnify ones that did out of proportion to reality. Okay. Now, as far as action, start with and strive for internal peace. Deal with your own hatred first, because the only person you really control is you. And that journey of getting to a peaceful place will prepare you to better deal with others' hate and foster interpersonal, perhaps even international peace. Now, I had a cup a student gave me a long time ago, and on one side of the cup, a coffee cup, it said, that man is a success who brings out the best in others and gives the best of himself. And the other side said, that man is a success who leaves his little corner of the world better than he found it. And that's all any of us can do. Okay, I'm done. Thank you. Stop sharing here. Stop sharing. There we go. All done.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good job, Ray. That's good. Good stuff.
A lot of stuff. Sorry it was a little long, but hate's an important topic. There's a lot of tentacles.
It's a big deal, but there's a lot of very practical advice you gave about how to think about it and how others think about it and how to not go there and do it differently. That's pretty cool. I thought it was very useful.
I spent 33 years dealing with a lot of hate in the classroom. Kids unfortunately pick up what their parents think, feel, and believe and behave. And sometimes you get a lot of hate in classrooms. Either, I was in an all-white school. I hate using that term, but I was in a school where there were no people of color. And so it was easy for them to do that because everyone around them would probably agree with them or at least not challenge them. So I did.
Yeah.
I challenged. Sometimes I got in trouble for it because parents would complain that I was challenging their kid. Well, I'm doing that for his own good. Okay. And then eventually the
Yeah.
school started to get integrated, and then people had to modify some of their beliefs, or some people didn't. And there's a lot of hate
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of practice contending with that kind of thing, including homophobia.
So the basic reason
that's
of this
not-
hate
that-
is from childhood experience. Basic reason, basically from childhood experience.
Had a lot of it, 33 years of it.
Yeah.
But it's
So,
good. It makes you a better person. If you have to deal with this in others, it reinforces in your own mind some things that are helpful and right, whatever that means, just better ways of dealing with other people. If you're a teacher, you have to be on your best behavior all the time. You can't go with hate. You can't do all those things that, if I'm a construction worker, I can think, feel, say, and do whatever I want on a construction site, and the other guys might go along with me. But when you're a teacher, you have an obligation to lead the way to better things. And it forces you to be a better human being and be on your best behavior all the time. And tactfully, but assertively challenge other people when they cross some kind of line.
yes.
Makes sense.
So thank you very much. I think due to the festival time, so people are already busy. So thank you once again.
Celebrate.
Very nice talk. Very nice talk on hate. What are the interventions we have to apply for that? Everything was well explained. Thank you, Mr. Ray and Mr. Matt. Definitely, we will continue this. Thank you very much once again, and we wish our
Thanks for having us.
regional festival season for you, and we are inviting definitely to Kerala, especially our festival time. We will definitely inform you. And thank you once
Happy
again.
New Year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure
With
you'll
all
have
blessings.
fun.
Yeah. So, okay, thank you once again. We will see you tomorrow, next week, the same Saturday.
Ray, do you have something pressing for next week? I don't really.
Well, we can talk about it. We'll let
Yeah.
Doc know real quick, as soon as
Yeah.
possible.
Okay,
Have some
we'll
ideas.
let you know.
Doc,
Maybe not.
Doctor, do you have any ideas? Any topics particular you want? Like dealing with self-esteem or something, like, because there's
What about peer pressure? What about peer pressure?
peer
peer
pressure.
pressure?
We can talk about that.
This is a very good topic.
Yeah, okay, we can talk about that. Yeah, because really peer pressure is a misnomer. It sounds like it comes from outside. So we try to teach kids to deal with it as if it's something outside, but it's not coming from outside. It's coming from inside. And that's why kids don't do well with peer pressure. So you have to teach them what it really is. It's an internal process. And if you realize what the internal process is, you can better deal with that pressure, because it really comes from you and what you think about other people and what might happen if they disagree or dislike what you say or do. It doesn't come from other people saying and doing things. So that'd be a
And
good one.
moreover, this is a drugs time. So many people, students are affected by drugs, substance abuse. So there is enough reason for
Well, that's,
explaining.
because that's
Yeah, yeah.
that would be a big one, because what I found when I first started teaching health is there's an old adage in psychology that behavior starts and continues because it serves a purpose. Well, the thing that gives purpose to substance abuse is that people generate more emotion than they know what to do with, than they want to have, and that's healthy or helpful or necessary. And that's what gives purpose. And as long as it gives purpose to substance abuse, there's going to be stuff out there, they're going to do it, and they're going to keep doing it until it stops serving a purpose. So the goal is to get people in a better mental and emotional place that reduces the purpose served by substance abuse. And hopefully they'd be less likely to continue. But you're always dealing with ruts, and they could slip into those ruts anytime, and they could slip back into feeling their own ways, thinking their own ways, and resorting to substances again. That's the problem. That's the challenge. So yeah, we can do that. Would be a good one too. Those two topics.
how to deal with this peer pressure based on emotional intelligence as well as that way you can think of it. So peer pressure is very important.
We could do
Nowadays.
substance abuse too, eventually.
Yeah, exactly. So there are
Fine.
special drives are there. Special drive. Okay, thank you very much. That's
Happy
it,
New
sir.
Year.
Yeah, happy New Year.
Joy.
Thank you. Bye. See you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I'm late today, but still I could attend for a few minutes also. That's really amazing, the work these two guys are doing. Thank you, sir, so much, Matt and this.
Today, based on our issue, there are some very less people are there. Anyway, they are done their work. It is their it is our problem to have such problem. Anyway, thank you once again. Have a nice day today.
Bye.
And with all
Happy New
blessings.
Year, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, happy New Year. Bye, all.